If you have ever bought clothing that says made in Canada, there's a very good chance it was made at Roopa Knitting Mills. So join us just outside of Toronto as we go behind the scenes for an exclusive first look at how your fabric gets made at Canada's largest knitting supplier. Alright guys, welcome. This is the breakdown from Shift Fashion Group. Today we are at the largest knitting mill here in Canada, and I'm here with the CEO and owner, Amit. Amit, can you tell our audience here a little bit more about Roopa?
Established in '91 by my father, so it's been around 33 years that we're around. I kind of grew up in this business. I was only 12 years old, learned a lot from him while I was still going to school. In 2000, he moved it to Toronto. I joined him right after uni and ended up sort of, getting in the fold a little more. 2008, I expanded it to, incorporating the whole garment division. There's just not enough fabric you can be selling in Canada. And we took it to that, and then here we are today.
So when he expanded to the garment division, alongside that, he produces for a lot of brands that you know and love. We're not going to say them today. Obviously being the largest knitting mill here in Canada and being such a great source for quality goods, he's built a solid reputation in the industry.
Thank you. That's not much more I can say than that. I mean, customers have come to appreciate our quality, our honesty, our integrity, our trust. You have to give it up to them, because without them, you're nothing,
Thank you for letting us into your world today. We're going to be taking a look at all the processes that Amit goes through here at Roopa to produce all the goods that he does produce. All right, Amit, so this is the very first step when we're coming into your knitting mill. Tell us about this process here.
So, it all starts with the raw material, the yarn, right? And we source all kinds of yarn. I mean, cotton, tons of kinds of cotton, polyester, nylon, rayons, bamboos, models, acrylics. It starts here with the yarn. We get orders. We produce internal knitting orders to produce the fabric, right? We select the proper yarns, proper machine. That's where this all starts, it's the yarns.
Let's talk about the yarn a little bit more, because I always say when it comes to fabrics, people just see nylon and spandex and think it's all the same, but it's really what you do with the ingredients, and this is your raw material right now.
Yes, and I mean, we do largely use cotton for the most part. A good part of our clientele just stick to natural fibers as much as possible, which I applaud. I'm a big fan of cotton. But there are so many different types. And whether they be based on the fiber length or the staple length of the cotton to the way the cotton is spun into a yarn, it creates so many varietals or qualities, and it all depends on what the client ends up wanting. Do they want a dry hand? Do they want a stiff hand? Do they want a smooth finish looking fabric? Do they want something that has some texture or appearance to it? Yeah, there are tons of different yarns.
And this is what I always talk about on our show is, it takes a master of their craft to be able to take the raw materials and turn it ultimately into what people are sometimes just giving you a wish list of. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you get people just bringing in a swatch or a garment, and a lot of times you have to dissect these things, and if you get that favorite hoodie of theirs and you say, can I make a hole in this to tear it apart? No. So you got to kind of just go based on what you feel and what you think and put it together. And then, even in the same variety of cotton yarn, there's different sizes, right? You can go from, 5 singles all the way up to 80, 90, or 100 singles and more. And that just refers to the thickness of the yarn. Yarn selection plays a big part in producing a quality fabric, which is the base of all garments, right? Everyone can cut and sew, some better than others, but the fabric at the end of the day is what they're putting together, and it is fabric that you're putting on your body.
All starts with the yarn here.
Yes.
And then the next step is going to be knitting.
Knitting, that's right.
Let's go take a look at those knitting machines. This is where the magic happens, where we turn the raw material into something everyone knows and loves.
So what you see here is called a circular knitting machine. Circular knits, your most common fabric is going to be what we call jersey. It's what our t-shirts are made out of. When the environment is clean and the area is clean, the product that comes out is going to be better. So this is why we build isolation rooms for our machines. They're like little bedrooms that prevents dust from going out and contaminants from coming in. And then within that, at the back end of this machine, we have got a vacuum system with a bumblebee bag, so it absorbs and sucks up any of the loose lint, preventing it from coming back into the machine, because that lint comes back in the machine, it cakes up on there, pushes needles out, forth, start getting lines in your fabric. We've got 35 machines. We buy only the Mercedes-Benz of knitting machines made by Meyer. The backbone of the machine is a cylinder. Outside of the cylinder is where you have needles sitting. Outside of the needles, you've got these blocks that have inside of them what I'm going to refer to as almost like train tracks. And these train tracks are called cams, and they have basically grooves in them that tell the needle how to move and in what direction. There's only 3 ways the needle can go. It can go up, which is creating a knit. It can go down, creating a tuck, or it can just go right across, creating a miss.
And how many yarns do we have here on this specific machine?
So this specific machine has 84 feeders, 84 cones on it. We do double them up though, so that one cone goes from to the other, so you end up with 168 right now. This is a machine that will knit jersey, fleece, and it's a 2-end machine for fleece. The yarn is fed in with compressed air, driven only with electrical power. You know, the yarns are fed through these tubes to each feeder. The feeder meters up and sends the yarn at a certain tension into the machine. These are Coney feeders. They have brake sensors on them, so if a yarn breaks, the light will light up and the machine stops.
How many yards or meters does this output?
We generally tend to run our machines really slowly, so every machine in this building is going to run at around 22 RPM or less. Even if they're high-speed machines, we just don't push them. So if you've got average t-shirt weight fabric, you might make about 50 meters, about 55 yards per hour. And if you've got a very heavy fleece, maybe a 400 or 500 GSM fleece, you're making about 23 to 28 meters per hour. Well, we're traditionally known for producing very heavy fabrics.
After it comes out here, do these specific ones have a blade that will cut it?
Generally, you'll only find that on lycra-based fabrics, where you're knitting a fabric for leggings and whatnot. This one does come out as a tube, like a big sock, and in the dyeing and finishing process, you can decide whether you'd like to butterfly it open or not. A machine like this has about 2,000 needles. Maintaining the machine is a big thing. Like, you know, we will remove every block, remove all 2,000 needles, clean it.
In terms of resetting this machine for, let's say, a different size of yarn, how long does that process take overall?
So loading the machine with yarns, you know, can take, depending on how quick the operators are, 30 to 40 minutes or an hour, let's say. Loading the yarns, feeding them through, putting them into the feeders and into the needles, about an hour. The other part about setting it up is like actually setting up the stitch, right? So you've got, you know, this machine can make jersey, PK, fleece, and a couple of other structures too. So that setup time can take time, maybe upwards of a day. So yeah, you'll see the needle tops, the heads of the needle. So the needles are actually, if I can point out, around this tall, around 4 to 6 inches tall. And they've got little butts on them that act like the wheels in the train track. And then as the needle comes up, its latch will open up and grab the yarn. And then as it goes down, the latch will close and knit that yarn in. So as the machine is turning around, the needles are going up and down, up and down.
This is what comes out the other end of the knitting machine.
That's right. The knitting happens up here. The yarns are knitted together. The rest of the process is just the roll dropping down and rolling up, usually. We tend to, on some fabrics, drop them into a large box like this rather than rolling them up, just to prevent any lines or any creases to happen on the edges.
And you probably won't have to relax the fabric as much.
Yes. This is ultimately what you end up with. We've got a heavyweight jersey here. Will be about 13.5 ounce, which is about 275 GSM. Yeah, this is using a heathered yarn on the face, and it's a plated jersey, so it's got actually a different yarn in the back. A common term for everyone to know is greige fabric. Greige refers to fabric that's been knitted but is not dyed yet, and greige is very different from PFD, which has been, you know, prepared for dye, has already gone through some process of being wet, pre-shrunk, and all these different things. Greige fabric is raw fabric from a machine. You cannot cut it and sew it into anything. It will curl. It has no treatment on it. It still has the waxes from the thread on it. We knit and we produce according to weight. So this roll will weigh about 40 pounds, 18 kilos. We know how many times the machine has to turn. The machine doesn't tell us how much it weighs.
All right, so we are at another machine here, and this machine you're saying is running a modal spandex blend.
That's right. So this has got a wide frame on it, and it is meant to knit only one kind of fabric, a spandex-based jersey, typically going into women's dresses, compression wear, leggings. And because it runs spandex, which is fed in from up above here, it's got a lot of tension in the fabric. Now, typically we would roll a fabric and keep it as a tube. That tube and that tension on the edges of the roll creates center lines on this type of fabric. So as it's being knit and collected down at the bottom, this machine has a blade that butterflies the fabric open.
Let's actually talk about spandex-based fabrics too, because I think a lot of people think that spandex is what gives it the stretch, but knits in itself has a mechanical stretch built in.
And they do.
Spandex is what gives it the recovery.
Knits by nature do have stretch because they are a series of loops. Compared to woven fabrics where the yarn is elongated, the knit fabric has space between the yarn. It will stretch. That's why your t-shirt fabric stretches. When you want greater stretch and compression and recovery, you'll put spandex into it.
Let's break it down. When you see something that says 90% cotton, 10% spandex, I think a lot of people think it's by a volume or something, but it's by weight.
It's by weight.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
So you'll see a lot of denim that'll be like 1% spandex just because the main body fabric is so heavy.
And we calculate that, and one of the easiest ways is either to take a fabric after it's knitted, deconstruct it, and weigh what's there, and you know what percentage of it is cotton and what percentage of it is spandex. Absolutely. It's very difficult because as you can see, they look like spider web, really. You can't even see the spandex yarn. The other option is to weigh a cone. You knit a roll and then weigh the cone after the fact and weigh one of the cotton cones or model cones, and you'll get the difference and you'll know what percentage was fed in.
And I think it's these little tiny details that makes the big difference between a really quality product and something that's just been pumped out.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. We're not in a part of the world where we can compete on price anyways, so you might as well do it slowly, do it right, and make it perfect.
Just to give people an idea, what do some of these machines even cost? Because you got a lot of them.
About 75,000 euros, which is about $110,000, $120,000, all the way up to almost 200,000.
Yeah. What is the next step?
Next step is this guy goes to a dye machine.
All right, let's head on over there. All right, so now we are in your dyeing house. It is the only one in Ontario and the largest in Canada. Talk to us about where we are and what step of the process.
So this is our dye house called Canadian Textile Services. This is where all our fabrics are dyed and finished before they go on either to a customer or for cutting and sewing. The fabric, as you saw before, gets rolled up. This is cotton ribbed fabric, probably about 30, 40 meters on here. This is not how it goes into a dye machine. What we have here are dye machines that are called jet dye machines. It's a form of what we call almost rope dyeing. So what we need to do now is take all the rolls that form a part of a batch, open them up, join them together from head to tail, and then they'll be loaded into a dye machine where they'll move around to be dyed. We'll be opening and batching these lots.
How much fabric are you guys dyeing a day?
10,000 to 12,000 kilograms of fabric a day. The batches of fabric are opened up, then dumped into these dye carts where they're unrolled and joined together. Then we head over to our dye house and load them into the dye machines.
So we're at your dye machines here, and you have various different types of vats here.
They're all ultimately to dye fabric, and you can dye all kinds of fabric in them. The difference between the machines is that you've got different size of machines. So we've got a 4-tube machine where 4 different strands that were joined can be put in, and they'll circulate through the machine to be dyed. We've got 2-port machines for smaller quantities and 1-port machines. We've also got a bunch of sample dye machines where we can use just to set a color or just to do testing.
When it comes to dyeing, obviously you're going through your lab different process, and when you're going to bulk dyeing, how long are particular fabrics actually being dyed for?
The whole process itself on a color, and it depends on the fabric as well. Let's say 100% cotton, it's going to take anywhere from 10 to 14 hours to dye a color. If you're just bleaching the fabric, meaning making it white, that could take as little as 4 to 6 hours, and same goes for PFD.
And over here is the process where they're putting in the dye stuffs.
The dyes are brought from the powder room, it's mixed, and any dyes are inserted into this mixing tank, and then the mixing tank feeds them into the dye machine.
Your kind of dye master, he sets the formula based off of what he's been doing for the lab.
He does. It all starts in a lab where we have beakers and we have all the primary colors that are needed to create any shade you want. And that formula gets set on a very small piece of fabric, and that's what you call the lap dipping process. That formula then, which is done on a 5 or 10 gram piece of fabric, gets converted into dyeing 100, 200, 400, or 600 kilograms of fabric by the dye supervisors.
And for designers out there, black is not black. You need to specify what black you want.
There's there's black that has red in it, yellow in it, blue in it.
And obviously you do a lot more than just natural fibers too. So there's different types of dyes you actually need in terms of reactive, active-based dyes, dispersed dyes. And it's very difficult sometimes to match those colors across multiple materials.
And a lot of times the substrate matters. So if you're looking at a cotton fabric, which always tends to be matte and dull, versus a nylon that can get super bright, and then a polyester that's in between, it's very hard to match. If somebody gives you a swatch of the fabric, because we don't only match to Pantone, we also match to swatches. So if you give me a nylon fabric and then ask me to match that color onto a piece of cotton, I will have a hard time doing that. So these are actually heather gray. So the dye was in the yarn, or the color was already in the yarn. So these just get scoured. It's a process we call, when you do PFD, or when you don't have to add any bleach or dye, you're literally just cleaning the fabric, soaping it off, washing off the waxes, and it's ready to go to the next step. Yeah.
And for the members of our audience, can you explain to them what PFD is?
PFD is prepared for dye. So there are different ways your clothes could be dyed, especially if they're cotton. You have what we call here piece dyeing, and it's interesting that they call it that. And piece dyeing refers to dyeing lengths of fabric, rolls of fabric, long meterage in a one dye machine. The other process is garment dyeing, where your garment is made, it's cut and sewn, and then you pop that whole garment into a dye machine. When you're doing that, the fabric still has to come into these machines to be PFD'd, as we refer to, prepared for dye. And that just involves the same process as dyeing it, but no dyes in the machine. Just scouring, soaping it off, adding any chemicals that might be needed, like softeners or enzymes, and then taking it out, moving it on to cutting and sewing.
And obviously, garment dyeing, you're allowed to do a lot more funky colors, but you can use smaller lots.
For reactive dyeing, I always say, unless you really need small quantities, there's no sense in working in garment dye, only because there's a lot of unknown variables with it. It's ultimately more expensive, and so we lean towards piece dyeing the fabric. And you also have to contend with shrinkage on your garment when you're dyeing it after the fact. So once the fabric goes into the machines and comes out, 8, 12 hours, 14 hours, maybe even sometimes 16 hours have elapsed, and the fabric's taken out, it's sopping wet, it's got to go to the next stage, which is the squeezer.
Let's take a look at that.
All right, so we've got 2 squeezers here for tubular fabric. A squeezer is essentially 2 rubber rolls that the fabric passes through, and they squeeze all the water out of the fabric and have it damp as opposed to sopping wet. The next stage, slitting. If you wanted to open up the fabric, there are slitters. There's one right here. You can see it's still essentially in rope form here. It's very wet. This machine is going to de-twist it all and make it flat on the other side, as well as slitting it, yes. The next stage is going to be drying this fabric so that it's bone dry, because it is still damp. We've got 2 options for that. If it's open width, we'll take it over to the stender frame, and if it's a tube, we'll go over to the relaxed dryer. So this huge guy right here is our stenter frame. We do a lot of things on this machine. It is the largest machine. It's about 30-40 meters long. With cotton fleece, we're usually just using this machine to dry it because it's very efficient. It is oil heated versus gas. Every synthetic fabric you produce, including polyesters, nylons, and lycra fabrics, all have to go on here in order to be heat set.
When you're knitting a synthetic, it is a straight yarn, and by going through the heat setting process, you're putting it into a vitrification stage, I believe it's called, and you're getting it to actually melt into that sheet of fabric.
That's right. Very important with the lycra fabrics, we actually have to do a pre-heat setting stage. Spandex base with nylon, you're knitting that fabric, that lycra is always pulling. You need to bring it here, pre-heat set it to put it in its sort of in its place of where the width and where the weight is going to be, and stabilize the lycra. Then you can, or spandex, then you can take this fabric, send it back to the dye machines, dye it, and then after it comes out and gets dried or squeezed, it will go right back through here a second time where it's rolled.
And there's a lot of different steps in this machine.
That, you know, looks like an airplane cockpit almost. Yeah. You do have to be very skilled at running it and understanding what all the controls and contraptions are on this machine.
Are you applying any chemical finishes?
Almost everything is applied here because this is where the pad is. So if you're applying, you know, whether it be silicone softener, a wicking finish, an antimicrobial finish, aloe treatment, and there's a plethora of them.
Any coatings?
Any coatings, anything that needs to go dipped into it and then cured with heat is going to go through here. It runs, you know, it's got a series of pins and chains that the fabric is stuck onto, and then fed into the main first chamber. And this one, I believe, has eight chambers that it, you know, goes through. And essentially, it's a really big oven, you know. It's a fancy big oven.
But these things are actually on rails, so you can adjust the width here.
That's right. So you're adjusting the width to establish the perfect shrinkage, the perfect weight on the fabric.
We looked at the center frame with now getting fed into the machine, and every single one of these are now drying the fabric and heat setting.
Drying it, heat setting it. Pretty long machine, the longest one in the building. The temperature inside of this is probably around anywhere between 130 to 180 degrees Celsius. It's a very complex machine to run, and it's so huge. It's got telephones on either end, where the guy at that end can be talking to the guy at this end.
Wow. So then now it's come out, it is now dried.
Completely dry, yeah.
And in this case, this is a fleece coming out here, right?
This is a fleece, yeah. It looks like a fleece that has already been brushed and probably had to go through for a final drying or something. Normally, it would go into here and it would get rolled there.
And then at this stage now, they're just rolling up the fabric, getting it ready to ship to your clients.
That's right.
Typically, how long are each roll going to be here? Is it going to be set for your clients?
It's going to be depending on the weight of the fabric. So anywhere between, you know, 75, 80 meters on a lightweight fabric to as little as 25 meters or 23 meters on a heavy fleece. So we talked about drying the open width fabric on the center frame. This here is a relaxed dryer. It's literally called the Jumbo. This is where we dye tubular fabric. So it's just a relaxed dryer with a conveyor belt. Feed the fabric on. It goes through a huge chamber with heat, comes back out the other, not even the other side, but on the same side, completely dry.
And let's talk about for those designers and brands themselves, what are the different applications of a open width versus a tubular fabric?
With synthetics, you always got to go open width because you need to heat set it. But with cotton, why would we go tubular versus open? As far as shrinkage goes, it's always better without washing to get a higher rate of compaction on tubular fabric. When you're making a t-shirt, a lot of companies make t-shirts without side seams. They need a tube body width fabric. Even if you are putting side seams on your t-shirts, we still produce t-shirts with tubular fabric. You can use the edges, whereas when you've got opened up fabric, you've always got a waste of an inch on either side.
When you're looking at the process of dyeing, you can't just have one knitting machine. It is something that you have to do at scale.
With dyeing, you've got, you know, huge infrastructure changes within a building. I mean, just to set this place up took a little over a year. You need to have pipes run throughout. You need to dig into the ground. You need to set up so many connections. And then once you've got it all set up, there are so many stages to dyeing because it's not just dyeing, it's dyeing and finishing.
And when we're talking about fabric itself, and that's why a single jersey knit is not just a single jersey knit. There's so many ways to go about getting there.
That's right.
And the finishing, the dyeing, the yarn, it's not all the same. And quality materials make a huge difference. Quality dyes make a huge difference. Let's take a look at the next stage we're going to look at.
Sure.
This is where you turn terries into fleece.
All fleece, which is that fabric that has that soft brushed inside in the back, is knitted as a French terry, you know, also referred to as loop back. So it's knitted with loops, and those loops are a part of what turns into fleece, and that's done at this stage. So it's actually after the knitting, after the dyeing, after some of the drying and finishing, it'll come to a stage that we call napping. And this is where we take French terry fabric and run it on special machines that have raised wires on them that grab at the loops and tear and shred them to create a nice, fluffy, soft pile.
Let's take a look at that. All right, so we're now at your napping station. So I see you have sequential stations up here.
So in order to get the fleece to where we want it to be, you know, we got to do 3 passes. Rather than buying one machine and wrapping around each time, we put them in tandem and set up 3 machines one after the other. so that you get the 3 passes without having to shift the fabric back and forth. A napping machine, or also referred to as a raising machine, is going to have one large roll that has individual rolls within it, and the whole contraption turns, but then each individual roll also turns. Some turn counterclockwise and some turn clockwise. And these are, hard wire bristles, let's call them, that the looped side is going to run over with tension, and while they're turning, it's literally brushing and tearing these loops to fluff them up into a pile. So it goes through the first initial nap, it'll go through a second one, and then once you get to the third one, it's a nice, fluffy, voluminous, beautiful fleece.
We are now here at the end. It's gone through 3 stages. So typically, when you are seeing a lot of fleece items, you'll get a lot of brands that use some polyester for the loops as well.
Historically, poly would have been used because of the low price of oil. It just makes it cheaper. Why would somebody want to use polyester? 2 main reasons. One, they're not washing their fleece after napping it the way we do on our 100% cotton or our 80-20. It will improve the shrinkage. So having a little bit of polyester gives you better shrinkage rates. Nowadays, more importantly, with the number of people in this world and just consumer safety, flammability is a big issue too. So a lot of countries won't even allow product to come in that could potentially. So if you've got 100% cotton on the loop side and it's brushed, it is liable to flame up. So putting 50-50 cotton polyester blend in the back is going to give you class 1 flammability ratings as per all textile testing standards. This is a big reason why people will switch to.
Check the ruling in your jurisdictions on that to make sure you as a brand are importing the right product.
And also, if you get big enough that you enter into countries, sometimes you have to adhere to those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So when it comes to the actual napping itself, is there any issues in terms of those staple fibers coming loose because it's been napped?
They definitely will. After we nap this, this fabric is really pulled on a lot in the length. It's got a lot of length shrinkage in it. At this point, this fabric is, probably got 15% length shrinkage. We put our fabric through extra stages that others do not to wet it, reactivate, put it into a tumble dryer, shrink it back, make those fibers relax so your shrinkage goes down. And while you're doing that, a lot of this loose lint will come off. So it's not as bad as it would be if you bought a brand new garment made out of this.
And I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't realize why certain garments shrink. It's because everything is done under tension.
Everything's done under tension. And knits, as we said, by function have shrinkage built into them because they are a series of loops woven, like a woven where your thread is like pulled straight.
You're locking them in.
You're literally like, like this, loops. So there's space in there. That space has got to go somewhere, and different fabrics have different amounts of shrinkage in them. But when you're pulling on this, you're creating shrinkage.
But this is going to be the next step after napping.
After napping, we'll bring the machine here. It's got a sort of proprietary spraying contraption on it where we've put on a water sprayer to moisturize and wet the fabric. We don't have to put it into a large vessel again. We get it about 50 to 60% moist, and it is very important to do that to activate the cotton fibers so that they will shrink when you put them in the dryer. Drying dry fabric isn't going to shrink it as much as drying wet fabric.
The next step would be the drying.
Second to last stage. This looks very familiar to everyone because we all have one in our homes, or most of us do. It's a tumble dryer. It's just an industrial size tumble dryer. It's drying that wet fabric. And a big part of the thing is it's really a tumble dryer, and that tumbling aspect of it is what really helps wake up the fibers. You need it to go up, fall down on top of itself. Go up, fall down on top of itself. So that action combined with the heat dries the fabric and allows the cotton fibers to relax and shrink down.
So you're saying I shouldn't overpack my dryer at home when I'm doing laundry?
Absolutely not. And if you want to keep your normal made clothes at length, dry on cold.
There you go.
Once we've done this, that 15% I mentioned earlier comes down to about 7 or 8. So So we've still got an opportunity to reduce the fabric length shrinkage, because that's what most knits suffer from, and we do that on our compactor.
A lot of brands will actually skip these steps because they get more fabric, their yield is higher, then they can make their product cost cheaper.
You know, that's the philosophy of a lot of fabric manufacturers, not us. They will pull on the fabric from the exit end to get more meters out of it, make it lighter, but pulling on it isn't helping the shrinkage, it isn't helping the brand or the customer. We tend to push from the inside so that we can get those stitches closer to each other. The fabric gets heavier, the stitches getting closer means shrinkage is being minimized.
Quality products and sustainable products are ones that actually just last a long time.
Absolutely. There's nothing more sustainable than a hoodie or a garment that you can have and own for a decade or more, you know? Yeah. So somewhat similar to the Stenner frame, the compactor also runs on a pin and chain system where we can also set the width of the fabric. An important thing here is that when this fabric comes out of the dryer, it's shrunk in the width too. It's probably maybe around, let's say, 56 inches wide. And we'll pull it out so that it's 58 or 60. And in doing that, when you're spreading out the width, you're also bringing in the length. So we do that to get what we call a square shrinkage. You don't want to have 1% in your width and then 6% in your length. If you want it to shrink, you want it to kind of shrink evenly. So by pulling it out, we'll end up, after this process is done, with about, you know, a maximum of 2x2 or 2x3 or 3x2 shrinkage.
And that's how you end up with a product that doesn't turn from a t-shirt to a crop top.
We're overfeeding it, we're pushing it through. That's why you almost see this gathering here, and it goes through a Teflon blanket where ultimately the fabric is almost like given an ironed look so it can be properly inspected and then rolled up on the other side of it.
So now it's gone through the steaming stage, it's gone through the compacting, it's gone through the Teflon blanket to give it the nice surface finish. Now this is just rolling it into its final roll for shipping.
Rolling it, but a really important stage here is inspection. So the operator is always watching, and the way we roll our fleece is always face side out so that the operator can see and take note of any defects, tag them if he has to.
I always say this is like one of the most important stages, and this is how I can also tell the quality of a lot of cut and sew manufacturers.
I think one of the biggest things is, especially when you're in a high cost nation, shipping fabric out that then has to come back is a killer. Make sure you check it. We check at every station actually. After dyeing, after drying, after napping, we're looking at colors because colors can change throughout every process. So there's not only inspection at the end, but you know, there's got to be quality control throughout every step.
And I think when it comes to color too, in terms of the fabric, it's so sensitive in terms of even environmental effects.
Yes.
How much moisture is there, humidity,
moisture, evaluating color. You have to condition the fabric so that it comes back to whatever the normal conditioning or levels are.
All right, so that is all the stages that we go through with Roopa Knitting to get the products that they make. I want to thank you for sharing with our audience your processes, and thank you for letting us capture this.
No problem. Thank you for having us. Thank you for sharing us with the world. If anybody needs fleece or any other kind of circular knit fabric, please check us out, roopa.com and Roopa Knitting on Instagram.
And be sure to check out the podcast we're about to film right now. If you guys want to see more of these type of videos and more on what goes on behind the scenes in fashion, don't forget to subscribe and check out these videos.